Hello, and good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, or good night, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for coming along. We've got 50 people have turned out on what in the UK is a boiling hot afternoon. So I hope you've all clocked off early, and I hope you've all got your glass of lukewarm white wine, which is traditional for book launch. Cheers, good health. So I am Jeff White. I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm the author of this book, Crime.com, which I presume is the reason why you're all here. If you've inadvertently tried to Zoom bomb Boris Johnson, you're in the wrong place, but stick around, you might learn something. Also joining me on the line is a chap called Brett Johnson. I'll let Brett tell his backstory in a second, which is absolutely fascinating. For the moment, though, what you need to know about Brett is that he's a security consultant, and that's a good thing for all of us, given his past. Brett is on the road and has been traveling around the US bravely and is struggling to get webcam working. So it'll be an audio contribution from Brett. But in a way, the story he's got to tell is interesting enough that even without the visuals, it'll still be fascinating. Most importantly, thank you for turning up. I really appreciate your support on this. It's slightly daunting launching a book and doing all this stuff. And so it's nice to have you with me. The reason I was so keen to write a book about cybercrime is that there isn't one. There isn't. I mean, unless I've missed it, there's no book that I could find that covered the whole thing from beginning to end, the whole journey. And that's such a shame because it's an incredible story. It's an absolutely incredible story, the story of cybercrime. If you read the book, and if you've got a copy, if you start reading it, you'll discover how the roots of hacking, that the origins of computer hacking started out really during the hippie era. A whole bunch of people who were fleeing the sort of destruction of the hippie movement fled online, and they formed these online communities, these sort of online utopias. And the idea was that they could create that online where they couldn't create it in the real world, or the real world, so to speak. And that's really where the origins of hacking began. There's this entire crossover with the sort of psychedelic hippie movement and the early forms of hacking. And of course, you know, people who are interested in lawless environments, criminals among them, started to move around in these kind of early online spaces. It's a really amazing sort of formative era of cybercrime. You'll also learn in the book how the fall of the Soviet Union had a massive impact on this. There's this incredible statistic about how many university students in Russia were being sent through on engineering and technology courses during the mid-90s, at the same time as the country's economy was tanking. And what that meant was you had a whole bunch of very technologically switched on young Russian guys, usually guys, who had no jobs to go to because the country didn't support them, couldn't support their employment. And so some of them turned to cybercrime. There's a huge boom in cybercrime around that era, particularly credit card fraud. And Brett is going to particularly pick up on that. That's kind of the beginnings of where he starts to come in. But what's perhaps most important is you'll also learn through the book how that cybercrime wave, the tools they developed, the tactics they developed, have now been picked up by much more powerful and sinister forces. Organized crime and governments are now using the same tools that the cyber criminals have developed. And of course, they're not just applying them to earn a quick buck. Governments and powerful forces are using these same cybercrime tools to change the things we read, to change the results of elections, to switch off the lights in power stations. That's the stage we're at the moment. And that's come about really because of a confluence behind the scenes of these very powerful hacking groups. They've started to learn each other's tactics. And as governments have arrived, they've injected money and time into all of this. So suddenly the whole threat has escalated. So it's big stuff, it's beefy stuff, and it's important. But that's not how you sell a book, and that's not how you get people to read a book. One of the things I was really keen to do was make the book fun to read and interesting to read. I'll be honest, I cannot read a book that doesn't have a story in it. So, you know, if there's a book about, I don't know, geology, I can read it so long as there's the story of geology. As long as it follows a timeline and narrative, I can read it. I really struggle if there isn't a narrative and a story to pull me through. So cynically, in every single chapter, I wanted to tell an amazing story of a hack. These are absolutely phenomenal tales. They're kind of Hollywood-esque stories about how computer hackers break in somewhere. Okay, there's a power station. How are you going to get in? And they break down like Hollywood blockbuster film scripts. You know, they scope out the venue and then they find particular ways in, and then they get stopped, so they have to work around that bit, and then they figure out this bit. Absolutely incredible stories. And the thing is, the stories in the book, they're not necessarily all new, but they've been told through the medium of technology reports and security company reports and indictments in courts. these stories are there. They've just never really been told to the public in a way that's as exciting as it could be. You know, a dry technical document gives you the outline, but I wanted to get the sense over to people of how these things work and the excitement. So frankly, if you wanted to read the book just as a true crime story, you can do that. Every single chapter has got a sort of fun thing with crazy characters, and that will get you through. But lurking behind each of those chapters is a much bigger issue. There's things about sanctions dodging, there's things about vote rigging, and there's things about our energy sector and the security of our energy sector. So all these big issues are lurking in the background, but to sort of sweeten the pill, I've tried to tell as many fun stories as I can. And it really has been a lot of fun to write. Suddenly all of these things that I accumulated over the 10 years that I've been covering technology and investigating technology spilled out and came out of the woodwork, and suddenly I was able to make all these connections. That was the other reason why I wanted to write a book about the whole of cybercrime, not just a particular cybercrime incident, was because if you write about the whole of cybercrime, you can connect the dots in really interesting ways. Something that happened 30 years ago that you didn't think was connected to something last week actually turns out to have a link. So you can make all these really interesting connections. The other reason to write a book about the whole of cybercrime is it broadens your audience. I hope that this book appeals to many, many different people in a way that a book about a particular cybercrime wouldn't, because it's really important that we all catch up to speed on this. Look, the people who do this stuff, the people who hack into power stations, the people who rig elections, the people who can work social media to kind of get their message out and to hack those systems, they are increasingly controlling our world. As more and more of our world shifts online, the people who understand all that stuff have more and more influence. And at the moment, it's influence that goes unchecked a lot of the time. There is no government in the world who can rein this in. There is no technology company who can save you. Your employer won't keep you safe. Increasingly, it's up to us to understand how this stuff works so we can be more savvy in future about keeping ourselves safe. On that front, there is opportunity at the end to ask questions. I'll go through the running order for this book launch in a second. I'm delighted that my local bookstore, West End Lane Books, fantastic bookstore, independent bookstore, is doing this book launch in conjunction with us. So if you want a copy of the book, not only have West End Lane Books been fantastic about working with us, they are also going toe to toe with Jeff Bezos of Amazon, of all people, and matching the Amazon price of 15 quid, which is astonishing. They are also, unlike Jeff Bezos, the only place where you can get a signed copy. So it's West End Lane Books. There should be a link in your little introduction paragraph, a little welcome paragraph at the top. WEL as in West End Lane, and then books.co.uk, all one word. And you can order there and you can get a signed copy. If you are in London or able to get here for tomorrow at 4 p.m, I'll be signing books at West End Lane Books. So you can come and point out all of the typos and errors that you found in the book, or just get the thing signed. So there you go. That's all the information, I suppose, about the book that you need. How this is going to work is, in a second, I'm going to hand over to Brett, and he's going to talk to you about his background and his journey through cybercrime and then also out of cybercrime at the end. I'll have a few questions for Brett thereafter. We're supposed to do a reading from the book. The idea, I was told that at a book launch, you read out a bit of the book. And I was thinking about that and thinking, well, that's just crap, isn't it? Because then when you read the book, you get to the bit that the person's read out at the book launch. You go, oh, I've heard this bit, and it's just ruined, you know, it's not anyway. So I thought what I'd do instead is tell you something that isn't in the book, and to tell you a story that I didn't manage to include because it's hugely embarrassing and went horribly wrong, which is not normally what investigative journalists talk to you about. So I'll talk to you about that. Then afterwards, it's your opportunity to ask questions. I'm happy to answer any questions about cybercrime, about the book and so on. Brett, through hearing his story, you'll understand his expertise. So if you're thinking about how to stay safe online, how this stuff works, any of those questions, there is a little chat window at the end that you can use to ask some questions. I'm just going to check our time there, which is all looking good. Boo-doo-doo-boo. There, great. So I'm going to hand over to Brett. Now, Brett is on an internet connection, which will explain in a hotel, I think, somewhere in the US. We don't have his video, but we do have his audio. So, Brett, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take it from there. If you want to just talk to us about, really, I'm interested in how you got started in all of this, how you got started in crime generally.
How did I get started in crime? Let me say first that I am extremely excited, just me, to read your book. I mean, the way you explained it there and everything, I am extremely excited to read that. I myself don't know the entire history of cybercrime, and I think it's something that most people need to know about in order to protect ourselves, not just from people like I used to be, but like you're talking about, the people who are shutting down power stations and everything else. My expertise. So the United States Secret Service called me the original internet godfather. The way that I got that title was being convicted of 39 federal felonies, being placed on the United States Most Wanted list. I escaped from prison, and I built the first organized cybercrime community. It was called Shadow Crew. It was a precursor to today's darknet and darknet markets. It laid the foundation for the way modern financial cybercrime channels still operate today. Those 39 felonies that I was convicted of, they had to do with refining a lot of the modern financial cybercrime that we now know, from account takeovers, phishing emails, synthetic fraud, tax return identity theft, credit card fraud. There's a whole gamut of things like that. Nothing to be proud of. And guess what? Of course, I went to prison. No doubt about that. I began my life of crime. To give everyone an idea, I began my life of crime at age 10. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky is, for those who have been in the United States, Eastern Kentucky is one of the areas like perhaps the Panhandle of Florida, parts of Louisiana, very poor. If you're not fortunate enough to have a job, you may be involved in some sort of scam or hustle or fraud. My mother was basically the captain, the showrunner of the entire fraud industry in Eastern Kentucky. I mean, no crime was too big or too small, from stealing a 108,000-pound Caterpillar D9 bulldozer. She took a slip and fall in a convenience store, tried to sue the owner. She had a neighbor. She used to, the neighbor was a prostitute. My mother was the temp for this neighbor. That was my mom. So I grew up, my first crime was my mom was very abusive to me and my sister. I was age 10. My sister Denise was 9. She used to leave us at home for days at a time. And this one time, Mom had been gone for a few days. We didn't have any food in the house. My sister walks in at age 9, and she's got this pack of pork chops in her hand. And I'm like, Denise, where did you get that? And she was like, I stole them. And I'm like, show me how you did that. She takes me over, and she shows me how she's boosting food. And I'm like, that's a really good idea. Let's do that. We look across the way, and there's a department store over there. Well, they've got clothing and all these other things. And so we start stealing clothes. And it becomes like this perverted form of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, books, games, jewelry, music, toys, all of that, until Mom comes home, sees the stolen loot, asks where it came from. I stand up and lie, saying, hey, we found it. She was like, no, you didn't find that. My sister stands up, we stole it. My mother looks at my sister, show me how you did that. And she joins us. Not only does she join us, but she goes and gets her mother to join us, and we become this kind of intergenerational shoplifting ring in Eastern Kentucky. That was my first crime. And here's the thing, and I've spoke to you about this, Jeff. I do not blame my childhood for my choices as an adult. My sister has the exact same upbringing. She, other than that one shoplifting experience, she never breaks the law again. She turns out to be a really good citizen, good parent, good teacher. Me, I'm the kid who just kept going. As I got older, I got more involved in types of crime and frauds that my mother and that side of the family was committing, from benefit fraud, charity fraud, insurance fraud, illegal mining of coal, forging documents, faking stolen cars, burning homes, breaking and entering. Yes, sir.
So it was the forging documents thing that you started to do online. There was that was really the shift online, the document forgery, as I remember.
It was. So I ended up branching off on my own when I was 24, faked an accident to get married, and I entered into internet crime shortly thereafter, and I was very unexperienced. I started doing eBay fraud and PayPal fraud under my own name, and as I got better, I learned how to hide my identity until it came to the point that I needed to start using fake driver's licenses and those types of documents. I wasn't good enough at that point in time to create my own. So what happens is I ended up getting scammed myself. A guy was claiming that he was able to produce these documents. I sent him my money, sent him my picture. He rips me off. That was the impetus of a website called Counterfeit Library, where myself and 2 other individuals, we built a forum there, which if you look at, there are 3 sites. There's Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, and Carter Planet.
And
Counterfeit Library and
sorry to interrupt, Brett, but when you say the websites, these were just on the normal web, and anybody could get to them?
That is correct. They were on the surface web. If you're looking at cybercrime, before these 3 sites, before Counterfeit Library, Shadow Crew, and Carter Planet, and I ran Counterfeit Library and Shadow Crew, before those 3 sites come up, the only avenue you had to engage in any type of organized cybercrime was an IRC chat session, an Internet Relay Chat. That's what that stands for, and it's a rolling chat board. You have no idea who you're talking to, if you can trust someone, if they're saying they have a product or a service for sale, if they even have it, if they're just trying to rip you off. What those 3 sites did, what Shadow Crew, Counterfeit Library, and Carter Planet did, is they gave a trust mechanism that criminals could use. Now, criminals had a large communication channel in the form of a forum type structure where a criminal could come in from a different time zone, look at a conversation, learn from the conversation, take part in a conversation that was potentially days, weeks, months old. You knew by looking at someone's screen name what that person's skill level was. You knew if you could work with them, if you could trust them, if you could learn from them, if you could network with them. If someone had a product or service, we had vouchers, review systems, escrow systems in place, all for the purpose so that one criminal that was never going to know the identity of another and who would never meet another criminal, potentially across the planet, could work with each other and trust each other. That's what Shadow Crew. Yes, sir.
So that's interesting. So trust was absolutely at the heart of this. So you're using people's reputations. They're building a reputation on the site so that when somebody sees another person with the same, with the same nickname or username, they can say, "Oh, I know that person. I know that the last time he didn't rip me off or she didn't rip me off. I know exactly this person endorses them," and so on.
Right. So if you think about it, the most important thing online, the most important thing for the good guys and the bad guys is trust. No one's going to shop at a retail store, whether it be Amazon or eBay or Apple or Microsoft, unless they can trust the site they're going to. It's the same thing for the criminals. Criminals cannot conduct business unless they know they can trust the person on the other end of the line. So it's all about how you build trust and how you can gauge trust within a criminal community. So Shadow Crew goes on to make the front cover of Forbes, August 2004. Headline, "Who's Stealing Your Identity?" October 26, 2004, the United States Secret Service arrested 33 people, 6 countries, 6 hours. I was one of the only guys that was publicly mentioned as getting away. The Secret Service picked me up 4 months later, and they gave me a job. And I'm the guy, I'm the idiot.
Sorry to stop you there, but as the journalist, the question in my mind is, how come you weren't one of the ones who was arrested when this site was shut down?
Oh, how come? Well, okay, so we had been, Shadow Crew at that point in time, we had over 4,000 members, and some of our members were very skilled at computer intrusions, okay? One of the members that we had, well, there were several, but we were intercepting text messages from the United States Secret Service about them investigating us. We were seeing IP addresses coming in from government agencies connected to federal law enforcement. We were seeing that Shadow Crew talked about on state and local law enforcement agencies in the United States. I was the head of the group. I was getting scared that I was going to be looked at for racketeering charges. At the same time I was doing this, I came up with this fraud that it's kind of went like wildfire across the United States, but it's called tax return identity theft. So what you do is you steal someone's personal information and you file taxes in their name in order to get a refund of taxes from the United States government. I was doing that, and when I started doing that, I was stealing about $160,000 a week, 10 months out of the year. As I was doing that, I realized I didn't need Shadow Crew in those forums anymore because I was doing okay by myself, and at the same time, I saw the writing on the wall that, hey, all these guys are going to be arrested. The way that Shadow Crew got busted, we had this thing called the Cbb One Hack. So Shadow Crew and Carter Planet are basically the ones that are responsible for modern credit card theft as you see it today. At that point in time, there was this hack called the Cbb One Hack. So if you look at, we were spamming all this information. We were phishing for credit card details, so the card numbers and the pins. In order for you to encode that on the back of a card and take it to an ATM and pull cash out of the machine, you have to have complete track to data. So on that mag strap on the back of the card, there are 3 magnetic stripes there. The first data track is there's 3 data tracks there. The first data track is the customer's name. Second data track is the card number. Then there's an equal sign and a 16-digit algorithm outside of that. You have to know that algorithm for you to be able to encode it and take it to an ATM to pull cash out of the machine. What we found out through trial and error is that none of the banks had implemented the hash, so that if you have the card number and the PIN, the personal identification number for the card, you could, to encode it, you just put the card number down, an equal sign, and any 16 digits outside of it, it would encode so you could take it to an ATM machine and pull cash out. We started doing that. My forum techie at that point in time, his name was Albert Gonzalez. He's in New Jersey, broad daylight, and we were stealing, so a single member at that point in time, there were 4,000 of us. Most of us were doing this type of fraud. We were usually stealing about $40,000 a day out of ATMs, okay? So Albert's in...
Sorry to interrupt, but the tactic you got was, as long as you had the card number and the PIN, you could basically take that card number and the PIN, stick it onto a blank card that you'd got that you could just code, and then take that card to a cash point, an ATM, and just stick it in and take $40,000 out, and just do that all
well,
day.
you would typically go to an ATM with, say, 100 cards, because you didn't know how much money was on each account stealing from. So you'd go there with 100 cards, and this is what happens with my forum techie. He's broad daylight in New Jersey. He walks up to an ATM. He's got a backpack on his shoulder. He's got a stack of counterfeit cards that he's got encoded with stolen credit card accounts on there. He starts feeding one card in after another, pulling $20 bills out, stuffing them in a backpack, stands at the ATM for 40 minutes. Finally, 2 New Jersey police officers that just happen to be standing across the way are watching this kid. One of them, after 40 minutes of this, decides he's going to go over and ask him what's going on. He walks up to Albert. Albert's got a wig on, he's got a disguise on, and Albert falls apart right there and goes to work for the United States Secret Service. So Albert goes to work for the Secret Service. I retired from Shadow Crew before Albert was able to set everyone up, and that's how I was able to avoid this.
Okay. Now, Albert Gonzalez is an interesting story, because when he, as you say, he turned informant for the Secret Service, and his information led to them doing all the arrests that you've talked about. But you would think that, being an informant for the Secret Service, he would then just rein in his hacking activities a bit. He went on some massive hacking spree. He and his mates drove around with an antenna, hoovering up Wi-Fi signals to see if they could get card details and Wi-Fi signals, and he then defrauded millions of credit cards. And so suddenly the Secret Service's sort of star informant has actually gone on a massive hacking spree, so they had to charge him and convict him. Have I got that right?
Well, you do have that right, and you're asking the wrong person whether he should have reeled it in, because while I worked for the Secret Service, I also screwed them over, and that's when I ended up on the United States Most Wanted list. So Albert, while he's working for the Secret Service, he becomes the largest credit card thief in history. He steals 170 million credit cards while working for the Secret Service.
Right.
So, of course, they find out about it, because, let's be honest, law enforcement always finds out about it. This story never ends well for any criminal. All right, so law enforcement finds out about it. They give him not 1, but 2 20-year prison sentences. He is still in prison to this day. I think he gets out in another 5 or 6 years, something like that. That's the story of Albert. Albert was extremely competent. The problem with Albert is you see this a lot with online criminals, and it's not a justification. It's just what Albert's motivation was. Albert had very low self-esteem. So he thought that stealing money could, raise his self-worth, I guess. So this is a kid that at one point, he throws himself a $75,000 birthday party. He has $1 million in cash buried under a doghouse in his parents' yard. When he worked for the Secret Service, we're all very good social engineers. I'm an exceptional social engineer. Albert was very good as well.
And so, sorry to stop you there. Social engineering is this thing where you're trying to trick the other person, whoever it is, into believing you're an employee of a certain company, or believing that you need some information. It's psychology, as I understand it.
It is. It's think of it as a really extraordinary con man. It's whether it be a long con or a short con, it's the ability to read someone almost immediately and understand what you need to do to manipulate that person into giving up usually one of four things: information, access, data, or cash. And that's social engineering. It can be it can be in person, it can be on the internet, it can be through the mail, over the phone, any number of things like that.
So what led to so you managed to avoid the initial arrests, and you were informing for the Secret Service, but still breaking the law. So what actually what actually got you in prison in the end?
What got me in prison at the end? So I'm the guy. So Albert is his main tick. His problem is self-esteem. My problem, because of my upbringing, is that constant search for love. That's me, and I steal money in order to pay for love. And I'm not talking about strippers and escorts. I mean, I did that, but I'm talking about the people who were important to me. It was never enough for me to show love in a healthy relationship. I always had to shower people with gifts because I was afraid they would leave me. So what gets me caught is that search for love. I won't go into that because that's a long story. But what happens is I go to work for the Secret Service. I rip the Secret Service off. They find out about it. I take off on a cross-country crime spree, steal $600,000 in the space of 4 months, end up on the United States Most Wanted list, get caught, sent to prison. What turns me around is initially my sister. My sister, she disowns me. She knew I was a criminal, but what she disowned me about was I had started dating this exotic dancer, and she did not like that. So that was the line in the sand right there. She was like, "Oh no." So Denise doesn't talk to me for a year. She doesn't talk to me until after I am arrested on the escape. At that point, I'm in a county jail. They've got a 10-minute visitation. My dad comes and visits. He asks if he can do anything for me. I'm like, "Yeah, you can tell my sister I said I love her." Dad gets on the phone, calls Denise and tells her. Denise gets in the car. She's not spoken to me for a solid year. Denise gets in the car, drives 7.5 hours pregnant to come and see me and tell me she loves me. And I don't see her again for over 5 years. That was the initial turnaround. It took 2.5 years behind a fence in prison. And I'm a firm believer that if you are a criminal, that you need some prison time, because it does you some good. It really does. So it took me 2.5 years in prison for me to understand that the only person who was responsible for me being in prison was me. I didn't do it because I was, trying to help family or friends or support family or anything. I did it because I chose to. I got out in 2011, could not get a job. I had no taste I didn't want to break the law at all, but I had job offers. I just wasn't allowed to touch a computer. So it went from trying to be employed for Deloitte Consulting to trying to apply at fast food jobs, Kentucky Fried Chicken, places like that. I couldn't take those jobs because that's a computer, that cash register is. From there, I tried to work as a waiter. I wasn't allowed to do that, so I wasn't able to get a job. I was bumming money from my father, from my sister. I had a roommate that was taking care of half the rent. I was on food subsidies, government assistance so I could eat. Didn't have any money. The first crime I committed when I got out, I had a cat, and I had enough money to feed my cat and didn't have enough money to buy toilet paper. So I went to the store, bought the cat some food, and on the way out, they had a kiosk with toilet paper, and I ended up stealing toilet paper. And what happened is, about the same time, my wife now, Michelle, she kind of found me. I didn't find her, she found me. And I ended up moving in with her, and she is the one that really changed my life. I was able to get a job, and the job I got was manual labor. It was cutting grass, mowing lawns. I did that until it got cold. The job ended, and that reason that I commit crime popped up again. That I have to prove that I'm valuable in the relationship. I have to do something.
And you went back in to prison. After that, there was another prison spell, was there not? After that,
there was. So what happens is I decide that at the very least I can bring food in the house. So I get online, get some stolen credit cards, start ordering food, get caught, go back to prison for 10 months. And that's when I find out that Michelle didn't need me for what I could give her. She just needed me for me. And I had never had that in a relationship other than with my sister. So I got out. We got married shortly after that. I spent 10 months in prison at that time. At that point, I got out after that. We got married shortly after that. I was off probation, and I reached out to the FBI. agent by the name of Keith Malansky. And I told him, I was like, hey, I respect everything you've done. He was the #1 cyber agent in the United States at that point. I told him, I said, I respect everything you've done. By the way, I'd like to be legal. And this guy, within 2 hours, he responded, took me under his wing, gave me references, advice. He does that to this day. From there, it was the head of the Identity Theft Council. Microsoft comes in and hires. Today, I lead a completely blessed life. I don't think I deserve it, but I am damn well grateful for it.
Well, that is
I speak across the planet. I've got a couple of podcasts, working on a TV series, a book now. I help consumer groups and anywhere from Fortune 50 to Fortune 500 companies protect themselves, basically against the type of person that I used to be.
Right, that is an amazing story, and thank you for sharing it with us. And it's interesting that the love of a good partner is so instrumental in it. What incredible! Oh, by the way, Keith Malansky, who you mentioned, is an incredible character. There's a whole bit about him. So he infiltrated one of the early Russian dark web forums, and he used the name Master Splinter. Master Splinter is a cartoon character from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So he gave himself the name Master Splinter, and he managed to work his way up, even as an FBI officer. He was pretending to be a crook. And then somebody managed to work out he was an FBI officer. So somebody else who was working in law enforcement in the UK had to come in and defend Master Splinter and say, no, Master Splinter is definitely a criminal. I'm sure so he's an incredible guy. Hey, I know there's going to be lots of questions for you, Brett, but I've got one I want to ask before I talk a bit more. You haven't got I've sent the book to you. Frustratingly, you haven't got it. In the book, I have said, and I'm dropping this on you slightly, this might be a bit of a surprise. I have said Johnson has the good-humored charm of a Brooklyn bartender and looks as if he spends his spare time overhauling Harley-Davidson motorbikes. We haven't got your webcam on, but I just wondered, is that all right? It's too late to take it out now, Brett. It's in there.
Hey, no, I love it. I think it's great.
All right, good stuff. Actually, Brett, we'll come back to you. We'll get questions in a sec. I know people have questions. Do you want to mute yourself quickly, and I'll just pick
absolutely.
Up that's great. Because the interesting thing is the story Brett tells is fascinating. That whole credit card journey, what he's talking about, defrauding credit cards at scale in ATMs. What's interesting about that is this gives birth to a whole sort of industry of cybercrime, of credit card fraud, cybercrime. What's interesting is, off the back of that, there's a bunch of people appear who've got really good skills and really big networks. One of them's a Russian guy called Evgeny Bogachev. He's the sort of Steve Jobs of the cybercrime industry. He takes all these products and all these bits of software and all these hacking tools, and he brings them together and he makes them super easy to use. And he's got a whole business plan. He's like a sort of Silicon Valley type entrepreneur for cybercrime. What's interesting, and he's doing similar stuff to what Brett was trying to do, stealing credit cards, stealing money, and so on. What's interesting is when they broke down Evgeny Bogachev's network, when they raided all his computers, they found stuff that wasn't just credit cards. They found that his software he was using to steal not just credit cards, but government documents, top secret documents, diplomatic documents that would be of use to the government in Russia. And the assessment was that Evgeny Bogachev was not just a cyber criminal, but was working for the Russian government. So the whole scene Brett's talked about there of the money coming in and the skills developing and people getting these high-tech tools, it doesn't stop there. All that stuff then gets picked up by governments and other organized crime gangs and used to escalate more and more. It's fascinating stuff, but it's really, really good of you to share that story with me. I'm gonna do a reading from the book, as I say, but I did promise you there'd be something that isn't in the book that I would talk to you about. One of the things I've talked about in the book and written about is there was an attack, a ransomware attack on the NHS 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, back in May 2017. Ransomware is dead easy to explain. Ransomware is really simple. Hackers infect your computer with a virus, it scrambles all your files, you then have to pay a ransom to them to get your files back. Dead simple. And because it's simple and because it's incredibly effective, it is making the money for cybercrime gangs at the moment. One cybercrime gang using one strain of ransomware made $350 million. And that's just one campaign. So the ransomware campaign I'm talking about is the Wannacry campaign. You will have heard of this because it hit the NHS disproportionately badly for a whole bunch of reasons, which again are outlined in the book. So I started investigating the Wannacry attack. Now, if you're going to pay the ransom, you're going to pay it in Bitcoin because Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, it's anonymized. So you pay the ransom, and so all these ransoms are paid. But the thing about Bitcoin is all of the payments are public. So even though it's anonymous, you can't see people's names, there's a record online of the transactions. So I think, well, follow the money, basic journalism. So I start tracing the transactions and I get down to one wallet, and the money, the ransom money, ends up in one Bitcoin wallet, one wallet address, which you can look at online. So I Googled it and I found this wallet belonged to a businessman in Croydon. Not only had I managed to solve one of the world's enduring cybercrime mysteries, the suspect, the lead suspect that I've tracked down, lived an Oyster card travel away in Zone 6. Fantastic, let's get on the train, let's go to Croydon. So I tell the bosses at Channel 4 News and we go down there and we spend a couple of days surveilling the house, because obviously if this guy's a criminal, we don't want to like get stabbed or shot. We watch his comings and goings, what time he leaves the house, what time he comes in. Is there anybody else in the house? Can we approach the house and get away quickly? We do this whole risk assessment. Then it's go time. We tried to contact the guy by phone, by email. He didn't respond. The only option is to go to the door and knock on the door, or wait till he comes out the house. So we turn up 4 o'clock in the morning because we know he's an early riser. Me and the cameraman and the producer, we're sitting in the van and we're watching. It's like a stakeout, the most boring stakeout ever. And then the lights come on and we're getting ready to go. And he's coming out of the house. It's like, right, this is our moment. We are gonna nail this guy in the street, and he's gonna confess to being a cyber criminal. And also, he had a really difficult name to pronounce. And of course, I'm on camera. I've got to get his name correct. So I kept saying his name over and over and over and over again, so I would get it right. We run down the street after him, and as soon as he turns around, something didn't look right. Like if you're an international cyber criminal, that's not the look on your face when you approach with a camera. He sort of turned around and said, oh, who are these people? Maybe they need directions. And I said, Mr. Such and Such, explain this. You've got this Bitcoin wallet. And he was totally nonplussed by the entire thing. And it was basically somebody had taken his business name and his business details and just hijacked them and used them. And we chased completely the wrong man down the street. And the worst thing about all this is it's not the first time we've got the wrong person. This never goes out on air. We don't broadcast it, but we occasionally get the wrong person. And what's really bizarre is when you finish that conversation, you go, oh, sorry, got the wrong person, and you sort of turn to go, and the person says, well, hang on, are you going to put me on I mean, you've recorded me, what are you going to do with that? No, don't worry, we're not going to use it. And you sort of have to reassure these people in the street. Anyway, that was the humiliating story of me failing to track down one of the world's biggest cyber criminals. The full story of the Wannacry attack and the person who actually solved it all is an even more fascinating story, and that is all in, once again, the crime.com book. There we go. Show the pack shot, there we go. So we have a chance to ask questions now, which I think you can do in the little chat window on your right hand side. So you can type out questions and get involved there. And I'm going to bring Brett back in now, if that's okay, Brett, if you can unmute yourself, and we'll bring you back in.
All right, thank you.
One of the questions I've got though is a lot of people say, well, these young hackers who get arrested, like yourself, once they've served prison time, can we employ them? Why don't we just employ them? They're obviously good at this. You're doing that now, but why isn't that happening more often? Why aren't we seeing loads of ex-hackers, helping us out?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. And the answer is it boils down to trust again. And, sure, I do this for a living, for a legitimate living now. I'm considered a good guy now. But the problem is that I used to be the guy who stole everything. And you have to build up a lot of trust. And I'm going to be honest with you, most cyber criminals, they go right back into committing crime again because it's so lucrative, it's so easy to do. Not only that, but when you get out of prison, no one is going to hire you. When I first got out of prison, no one wanted to hear me speak. No one wanted to bring me in to consult because, again, I was the guy who stole everything. And it takes a lot of time to build up enough trust that a company or a financial institution or a law enforcement agency will bring you in to speak to their members or their agents. That's a lot of the problem there. From the criminal mindset, I'm a firm believer that unless something makes a criminal change, especially a cyber criminal, unless something makes them change, they will not change. And they should be able to tell you exactly what that moment was that caused them to change. Most of the time, I'm talking over 90%. A criminal, especially a cyber criminal, goes right back into it because it's so easy to do. It's so easy to steal money. It becomes extremely difficult to catch these people once they learn how to hide their identity properly. I mean, you just told the story about the Wannacry that you thought that was a guy, and that's typical. I mean, one of the things we taught at Shadow Crew is that all crime should begin with identity theft. So you tend to hide behind other people's identities and layer it in like that, and it just becomes extremely difficult. And at the same time, it's easy to do. Plus, as a criminal online, you don't have to face your victim. You've got that buffer, that separation where you don't have to see the person you're victimizing.
Yeah. The question here, it might be a quick one for you. When is Brett coming to the UK? Obviously, we don't know when it is going anywhere. But do you come and speak in the UK much, or are you still I've seen you speak online in UK conferences, but are you planning a trip to the UK anytime?
You know, I was in the UK year before last, and I will be back just as soon as the world turns back on. I mean, I absolutely love the UK. I wish I could live there. I wish I could live in London, but who can afford London? You have to be a cyber criminal to live in London.
Actually, there's an interesting. I will be honest. I'm going to say who's asked the questions as well. I hope that's okay. If you don't want me to say that, just put anonymous or anon at the beginning of your question when you ask them. My lovely partner has said. Brett said he was motivated by needing to be loved. Is there a connection to be made with the love bug virus? And that's a really good point. So one of the opening chapter of the book, the opening sequence, is the love bug, which was a virus which went round, and it was an email that arrived that said, love letter for you. And you opened the love letter and your computer got infected. And the reason that was one of the most successful viruses ever created, it's the first global pandemic virus, computer virus. The reason it's successful was because everybody wants to be loved. And so everybody around the world, if you receive a love letter, no matter what language you speak, where you are, you're going to open the love letter up. So yeah, that's actually a good point. Bernard Acampong, who I did the dark web series with on Audible. Hi, Bernard, it's good to see you. What's the biggest legal challenge in writing this kind of book? The biggest legal challenge I found with this was if you do a sort of 4-minute news package, news report, you know, you go to the person for comment. You might go to the North Korean embassy or the Russian government for comment, but you know they're probably not going to comment. And so, you know, you're not too, they might give you something, they might not, but, you know, it's not as heavy. If you're writing pages and pages and pages, really going into a lot of detail about Russian government hacking or North Korean government hacking, or, you know, or US and UK government hackers, you really want to get, you're trying to get a response, and you're trying to sort of say, look, this isn't this isn't 2 lines in a news report. This is 340 words in a book. You need to respond, and that was the hardest thing. Was you know, thinking I've given them the opportunities to respond, but are they going to come back and say, well, hang on, you didn't tell us it's going to be a whole book about, you know, I've tried to be as honest as I can. The other thing, this is not a legal challenge, but this is slightly difficult, is that over the years, I've covered GCHQ and the National Cybersecurity Center, as it's called now, and the book is quite direct and challenging about that, because I have this sense of, we think, well, there's the bad guys over there in Russia and China and North Korea doing bad things, and the book details that. However, the problem is some of the same tactics and the same abilities and tools end up getting used by people in the UK, GCHQ, and the National Security Agency in the US. And I think, well, that gives the idea to the Russians. They can say, well, you're doing it, we're doing it. You're legally sanctioned, we're legally sanctioned. So there's some hard questions for the UK authorities in there, and I'll be interested to see what they make of it. Somebody says, oh yes, James McNiven has asked, this is one for you, Brett, I think. If you were to be a criminal now, what area or people do you think are now the soft target, if you were going to go through?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And the answer is, right now, every target is a soft target. We're in the largest pandemic that we've seen in our lifetimes. And because of that, every single fraud avenue is wide open for any criminal to exploit. And typically right now in the United States, it's all the pandemic relief that the government agencies are giving up. So here in the United States, we've got a paycheck protection program. We've got an unemployment insurance program for people who have lost their jobs. We've got an emergency assistance program. We've got all these different programs that is wide open for fraudsters to exploit. And I monitor dark web for law enforcement, for security groups. I'm seeing the profit potential just on that is benefiting criminals, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month right now, just a single criminal operating on his own. The Nigerians hit the Washington state unemployment system for $1 billion in fraud. That's just a few months ago. So that's where fraud is right now. But that being said, it's really every avenue right now, from credit card fraud to synthetic fraud, insurance fraud, any number of things that you can possibly think about. If I were engaged in fraud today or cybercrime, I would be exploiting the government channels. I would be hitting what's called synthetic fraud. So that's creating a fictitious person out of thin air and building credit up using that identity. I would be running a dark web marketplace, because the marketplaces make the people who run those, they end up making $20-30 million sometimes just running those. I mean, the profit potential for cybercrime these days is extraordinary. And you're absolutely right, Jeff. You talked about the connections of criminals with Russian government or whatever governments those are, and those connections are there. They certainly are. It's just the numbers, the way the numbers have exploded over the years. Shadow Crew in 2004, we ended with 4,000 members. Alpha Bay 2017 ends with 240,000 members. There was an arrest, a single website was shut down last year, 1.15 million members. That's just one website. So these numbers continue to explode, and they're not going to slow down anytime soon.
My wonderful partner has brought in the remains of the white wine, so that's fantastic. Jules Morgan says, thank you so much for your honesty. What a life. Thank you for sharing, Brett, which is a sentiment I think we all have. Alistair Manson asks, did you ever consider your victims? Which is a good question. When you were doing these frauds?
When I was doing it, no, sir. No, sir. I'm not going to lie to you about that. When I was doing it, I was very self-centered. I justified my crimes, and I did not consider my victims at all. I will tell you that these days I consider my victims every single day of my life. I have a lot of regrets in my life, and I'm doing my best to make amends for those victims. I'm also doing my best. I mean, I cannot make amends for my past crimes. I can reinstate the victims for losses, but I can't make up for me victimizing those people. But I can make sure that my choices today are to help people and not hurt people as I did in the past, and that's what I try to do every day.
Yeah. And I should point out that, the Brett isn't alone in that. There are quite a lot of people you meet every now and again who are, quite a lot of people who I meet every now and again who are doing exactly that, who are basically giving sort of clues as to how they did it. Amber Cowan asks, I'm curious, how has researching and writing this book changed the way you live your daily cyber life? Which is a good question, and sort of leads us on to the kind of news you can use sort of territory, advice territory. Writing the book didn't change massively the way that I lived my life online, because I've been covering this stuff for 10 years. So I'd already sort of, made the changes I was going to make. So for me, the way I've dealt with it over the years is to separate out my work life from my home life. So I have an entire, I have email address, mobile phone number, laptop accounts, everything work related is here, and everything personal related is over there. And the footprint, the online footprint of my professional life is really big. So you will be able to see my mobile phone number, my email address, where I work, all my stuff, my pictures, everything. So that professional profile is huge. The personal profile I try to leave is very, very small indeed. So fingers crossed, you won't find my mobile phone, my personal number, my personal email address, you won't find it. That way I can, the other thing is, as a journalist, I wanted to have opinions. I wanted to be able to say, I don't like this, or I disagree with this. I'd seen journalists do that and get in trouble because they'd use Twitter, a professional Twitter account, to say those things. I thought, well, I want to have a private personal life. I want to be able to say the things that I believe. But if somebody says, well, you put that on Facebook, I can say, yes, my personal Facebook. That's different to professional Facebook. So that's how I've managed to make it run. And my idea is, if the hackers go for something, they'll go for the professional side. And frankly, that could all burn, and the people I care about, the people I love, wouldn't be as affected by it. My friends, my family, they're all connected to my personal stuff. So that's the bit that I protect. That's the only way I've sort of managed to do it. Brett, have you got sort of a way you've, because have you got a way that you've worked this?
It's with me, I try to separate a lot of that. The problem is that my personal life and my history as a cyber criminal, they are intertwined. And I tend to do the same thing as a professional on the good guy side of things. Now, I talk about my private life, and I'll be honest with you, the reason I do that is it provides me a way of knowing more about who I am. So when I'm on stage talking, I'll talk about my personal life. I'll talk about my motivations, the problems that I'm having, everything else. And it helps me. It's kind of like therapy for me. So I don't really have much of a private life, honestly. I wish I did.
It's one way of solving it, yeah.
Yeah.
Gunak Singh, hi Gunak, asks, how many years research did I do and what made me start? What made me start was the publishers, Reaction Books, got in touch, and they said, look, we want a book on cybercrime. And what was interesting was I covered the hacking of TalkTalk, huge British ISP, broadband internet company, and they were hacked in 2015. And I'd done loads of work on TalkTalk, and I got all of it. I got loads of detail. I thought it was fascinating. So I wrote a piece about it, and no one would publish it. I couldn't get it in any magazines, any newspapers. No one wanted to touch it. So I put it online. I published it online on my own blog. The publisher had been looking around for people to write a book on cybercrime, had found my blog and read the piece and said, I think this piece is great. Would you write the book? So the lesson for me was, people in authority who told me, oh, that's not very good. People in authority generally who seem to have an opinion, I no longer massively trust them, because I think, well, I'm not sure whether you do know what you're talking about. So they asked me to write the book, and that was in April 2018, I think that was. And so from then on, it was 2 years. It was basically 2 years. So I got the contract signed on the 4th of July, 2018, and I handed the book in on the 4th of July, 2019, and then the book came out this year. So that's kind of how long it takes. Remarkably, it takes a year to print a book. Pressing Control P and waiting by the printer with a staple gun apparently takes a year. So that's that. Sam Hole asked an interesting question. Is there any kind of electronic voting that isn't potentially open to abuse? Is the only secure and reliably reviewable option analog voting? I'll be interested in Brett's view on this, but I'm interested by this because there has been a lot of worry about digital voting, electronic voting. What's interesting is the attacks on voting that we've seen aren't, as far as I'm aware, there haven't been huge scale attacks on electronic voting machines. What there has been is attacks on voter databases, notably during the US presidential election in 2016. So they steal the databases of voters. And also we've seen voter suppression. So the idea of telling people it's not worth going to vote because the voting machines are broken, or there's huge queues, or you haven't registered in time. So it's interesting because voting machines are so limited in the numbers of them, and they're only used every now and again. As a cybersecurity person, you're all over it like a bad rash. So it's a hard target. Getting through to the voters themselves and dissuading them from voting, I actually think is an easier target. So you're going to go down that route. So I don't know whether the electronic or analog voting systems matter. But Brett, what do you think of that? Electronic voting, would you do it?
Oh, Jeff, you're going right up my alley right now. There was a statement that I used to say with Shadow Crew, and then when I worked with the Secret Service, and that statement was, the perception of truth is much more important than the truth itself. It doesn't matter what the facts are, it matters what I can convince someone of. And you kind of touched on that with election. Okay, so does it really matter if we can, break into a voting system and change the votes? Or is it more effective for us to just change the perception of the person before they go to vote, to have them vote the way we want them to do? And we saw a lot of that influence with the Russian government coming in with the United States presidential election in 2016. They wanted Trump. There was a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news, everything else that was being put forth in order to skew the voting toward Trump. Now, you're absolutely right. The actual numbers of election fraud, at least in the United States, they're extremely low. In the past 20 years, we've had, I think, just a couple of hundred cases in the past 20 years. The thing is if they're easy enough to break into, certainly you can break into a voting system and put forth fraudulent votes. President Trump right now is complaining a lot about mail-in voting. You have the Democrats over here that say that mail-in voting is not very fraudulent. It could be. It's very easy to manipulate that vote, but it's far easier and far more effective to manipulate the person casting the vote. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing these days, is not worrying about changing the vote itself or breaking into or hacking the voting system, but instead hacking the human, doing that social engineering on the human to cause them to vote for who the candidate is that they want.
I think that's really interesting, and the overarching sort of theme of the book, I think I make this in the sort of introduction point in the introduction, is people think about hacking and cybercrime as being technology, code, hardware, software. It's not. It's people. And I think this conversation we just had is exactly along those lines. Is yes, I could break into a voting machine, I could work out how it works, and I could hack it and so on. Or I can just put something on Facebook that said, sorry, polling station's closed. I've just heard, there's been a bomb threat or something. What's going to be more effective in my time? 5 minutes updating Twitter or 2 days trying to hack into a voting machine. So I think that's a really good point, and probably to leave it on, because we're about an hour in at the moment. I just want to say, lastly, thank you so much to Brett. I really appreciate you joining us. It's a fantastic story. I know you've told it before, and I'm sure you'll tell it again. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. We can't wait to have you here in the UK, and I can't wait for you to receive your copy of the book. Thank you, Brett, for joining us.
Jeff, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone for listening. I appreciate it. Buy the book. It's going to be great.
And yes, on that front, as I said, the West End Lane books are going to be selling this for, at the moment, 15 quid. You can get a signed copy. When you go to the checkout, you have to add a dedication to your cart. So the dedication comes up as a thing you can buy and just add to cart, and I will sign it and so on. You can also get in touch with them by email and phone. They're very good. And if you want it sort of made out to people, they can sort that out. I will be there at 4 p.m. tomorrow, come hell or high water, or just very hot weather as we're having in the UK at the moment, to sign. Sorry if we didn't get round to your questions, and also there's people who I haven't heard from in ages who've asked questions, and thank you so much for coming along. If I didn't answer your question, please get in touch with me and email it to me. You can find me on Twitter, JeffWhite247, or I'm Jeff@jeffwhite.tech, or you can reach me some other way. Thanks again so much for listening. This chat will be on archive, so I think if you click the link, you'll just be able to listen back. So if you do want to listen back, if you're that interested, you can do that. Folks, thank you so much again for your support. I can't wait to see you all again soon. I know we're constrained, and I know this is weird. It's very different to the book launch I had in mind, but never mind. We will meet again soon, and in a way, being able to welcome so many people from all around the world has just been wonderful. Thank you again for your time, and take care. Stay safe online. Cheers.